introduced me at the company party as the leech maid. Little did she know that I've been the majority shareholder since my late husband's first investment. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought I'd hear those words from my own daughter-in-law's mouth. Not in a million years. "Oh, this is Martha, Michael's mother," Sophie said with that artificial laugh of hers. "Our little leech." The conversation at the corporate party froze for a second. I stood there, clutching my modest handbag, wearing the navy blue dress I'd saved for special occasions. The executives from the company where my son had worked for 8 years exchanged uncomfortable glances. "She's always hanging around our house," Sophie continued, her voice dripping with contempt. "Can't seem to manage on her own since Michael's father passed away." I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. 5 years since Robert died, and this was how they saw me: a burden, a parasite. The worst part wasn't the strangers' pitying looks. It was Michael standing there saying nothing, a weak smile frozen on his face. "I should find the ladies' room," I murmured, desperate to escape. As I walked away, Sophie's tinkling laughter followed me. "She's always been this sensitive. We practically have to babysit her these days." The bathroom was mercifully empty. I gripped the marble countertop, staring at my reflection. A woman with graying hair and tired eyes. A woman they knew nothing about. If they only knew the truth. If Sophie only knew that the company whose anniversary they were celebrating, Westbrook Technologies, belonged more to me than anyone else in that room. I was the majority shareholder. I owned 51% of the company that paid for Sophie's designer dresses and Michael's luxury car. The company Robert and I had built from nothing, working nights while raising Michael, mortgaging our tiny home for the initial investment. But I had promised Robert. On his deathbed, he had made me swear. "Don't tell Michael," he'd whispered, his voice already fading. "Let him make his own way. Let him earn his position without living in our shadow." I had kept that promise for 5 years. I'd attended board meetings quietly, through a proxy. I'd watched from a distance as the company grew, as my son climbed the corporate ladder on his own merit. I'd lived simply in my small home, never touching the millions that were rightfully mine. And I had welcomed Sophie into our family, despite her obvious disdain for my modest lifestyle. I splashed cold water on my face and straightened my shoulders. When I returned to the party, Sophie was holding court with the executive team, Michael at her side. Her red dress probably cost more than I spent on clothes in a year. But I didn't care about material things. Never had. "There she is," Sophie called out, as if we were the best of friends. "Martha, come tell everyone about your bridge club." "So, adorable how you keep busy." I smiled politely. "It keeps my mind sharp." What Sophie didn't know was that my bridge club was actually a monthly meeting with my financial advisor, reviewing the performance of Westbrook Technologies and my other investments. Later that evening, as we were leaving, I overheard Sophie whispering to Michael, "We need to talk about your mother. She can't keep coming to these events. She's embarrassing, Michael. People are going to think you come from, you know." "She's my mother, Sophie," Michael said, but his voice lacked conviction. "And she's holding you back." Jenkins was watching when she spilled her drink. "You're up for that promotion, Michael. We can't afford these mistakes." My heart broke a little as my son sighed. "I'll talk to her. Maybe it's time to consider that retirement community we looked at." They didn't see me standing there, didn't notice me slipping away to call a taxi instead of riding with them. On the drive home, watching the city lights blur through my tears, I made a decision. For 5 years, I had honored Robert's wishes. I had stayed in the shadows, letting our son find his way. But Robert never could have imagined Sophie. Never. Could have foreseen how she would poison Michael against me, how she would make him ashamed of his own roots. Tomorrow, I would call James Patterson, the family attorney who managed my shares. It was time to rethink my approach, not out of vengeance, but out of love, for my son, for Robert's legacy, and for my own dignity. As I paid the taxi driver and walked up the path to my modest home, the same home where we'd raised Michael, where Robert and I had dreamed of our future, I felt a strange calm settling over me. Sophie had no idea who she was dealing with. The leech was about to show her teeth. The morning after the corporate party, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, staring at a photograph. Robert and I on the day we opened the first Westbrook Technologies office, a converted storage room with 2 desks and a dream. I was 26, Robert 30, both of us exhausted but beaming with pride. We did it, he had whispered in my ear that day. This is just the beginning, Martha. Who would have thought that tiny operation would grow into the multi-million-dollar company it was today? A company my own son worked for, never knowing his parents had built it from nothing. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. James Patterson stood on my porch, his leather briefcase in hand. At 71, he was still sharp as a tack, the only person besides me who knew the full truth about my ownership of Westbrook. "You sounded upset on the phone," he said, as I led him to the living room. I poured out everything: Sophie's cruel words, Michael's silence, their plans to ship me off to a retirement community. James listened quietly, his bushy eyebrows drawing together. "It's been 5 years, Martha," he finally said. "Maybe it's time to tell Michael the truth." I shook my head. Robert wanted him to succeed on his own merits. "And he has," James pointed out. "He's earned his position. But Robert never intended for you to be disrespected this way." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a document, the quarterly report on Westbrook Technologies. "The company's thriving. Your shares are worth more than triple what they were when Robert passed. You could buy 10 mansions bigger than whatever house Sophie's showing off to her friends." I took the report, flipping through pages of figures that represented Robert's and my life's work. Nearly 28 years of sacrifice, risk, and determination. "Did I ever tell you about the beginning?" I asked softly. "Before Westbrook was even an idea?" James settled back, giving me the time I needed. "We were so young when we met," I began. "Robert was working as a computer repairman. I was a receptionist at the same company. We lived in that tiny apartment on Maple Street, the one with the leaky ceiling and temperamental heating." I smiled at the memory. "Robert would bring broken computers home, fix them in our kitchen. I'd help him with the bookkeeping, order parts. We saved every penny until we could afford to start the business. Those early years had been lean but full of purpose. Robert writing code late into the night while I managed the accounts, handled clients, made cold calls. Both of us terrified and exhilarated as we secured our first major contract. When I got pregnant with Michael, we were scared we'd lose everything," I continued. "I worked right up until my water broke, was back answering phones with Michael, in a bassinet beside my desk 3 weeks later." Those memories were so vivid. Nursing Michael between client calls, Robert taking him for walks when I needed to focus, our baby growing up surrounded by the hum of computers and the vision of his parents building something meaningful. "Michael saw all of that," I said, "but he was too young to remember. By the time he was in high school, the business was successful enough that we could give him a more normal life. Robert wanted him to focus on being a teenager, not on the family business." When Michael went to college, we made the decision not to tell him that his tuition was being paid by the company his parents had built. We sold our home and moved into a smaller house, using the difference to make it appear that's how we were financing his education. "We wanted him to find his own path," I explained to James, "not feel obligated to join the family business." The irony wasn't lost on me. Michael had found his way to Westbrook anyway, hired on his own merits, working his way up without ever knowing. Then Robert got sick. Cancer. Fast and brutal. "He made me promise," I whispered, my voice breaking. "In the hospital." right before. He made me swear not to tell Michael about the shares. Said our son needed to stand on his own feet, that the company would be his legacy, but Michael's success needed to be his own. James reached over and patted my hand. Robert was a good man, Martha. But he couldn't have foreseen this situation with Sophie. After Robert's death, I'd transferred most of his shares into my name, maintaining our controlling interest in the company. A small portion went into a trust for Michael that would mature when he turned 40, still 5 years away. As far as Michael knew, his father had left him a modest inheritance, nothing more. Sophie met Michael 3 years ago, I said. From the beginning, she made it clear she thought he could do better than his simple mother, always making little comments about my clothes, my house, suggesting I needed looking after. "And Michael allows this?" James asked, his tone sharpening. I sighed. He's caught in the middle. Sophie's ambitious. She sees him as her ticket to the life she wants. Life you could provide with the snap of your fingers, James pointed out. I stared down at the photograph again. Young Robert and Martha, full of dreams that had actually come true. "I don't know what to do, James," I admitted. "I've kept my promise. But at what cost?" James closed his briefcase with a decisive click. "I think it's time we reviewed your options, Martha. Legally, the company is yours to control as you see fit." As we began discussing possibilities, I felt something stirring within me. Not vengeance, but a quiet determination. Robert had wanted to protect our son from entitlement. He never intended for me to become a doormat. It was time for some changes at Westbrook Technologies. The following week, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years, visit Westbrook Technologies headquarters. Not as the majority shareholder, but as Michael's mother, bringing him lunch as I occasionally did before Sophie came into our lives. The gleaming glass building downtown was a far cry from our first office. I signed in at reception, noting how the young woman eyed my modest clothing with barely concealed judgment. "I'm here to see Michael Westbrook," I said. "I'm his mother." She looked skeptical, but called up to his office. Minutes later, Michael appeared, surprise and something like discomfort on his face. "Mom, what are you doing here?" He glanced around nervously, as if worried someone important might see us. "I brought your favorite," I said, holding up the bag containing his lunch. "Chicken salad on sourdough." His face softened slightly. "You didn't have to do that." He led me to a small break room instead of his office. I understood. He didn't want colleagues seeing his unfashionable mother in his workspace. As we sat, I noticed dark circles under his eyes. "You look tired, sweetheart." Ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father's it made my heart ache. "Big project. Sophie's been stressed too. She's got her heart set on that house in Lakewood Estates, and we can't afford it unless I get this promotion." I knew Lakewood Estates, multi-million-dollar homes where executives and old money lived, far above Michael's current salary, even with Sophie's income from her part-time interior design work. "That's quite ambitious," I said carefully. Michael sighed. "Sophie says it's the right neighborhood for someone on my career track. She's already talking to designers." He smiled weakly. "You know, Sophie, once she sets her mind on something." I certainly did know. After lunch, I asked to use the restroom. Instead, I took a detour, wandering the halls of the company Robert and I had built. I recognized a few old-timers who nodded politely, not knowing who I really was. The executive floor was quiet, most occupants at lunch. Sophie's voice drifted from a conference room, door slightly ajar. "She wasn't supposed to be here today." Curious, I paused. "Trust me, David. It's a perfect arrangement." Sophie's tone was intimate in a way that made me uncomfortable. "Michael gets the promotion. You get the contract, and I make sure everyone's happy." A man's voice, low, amused. "And how exactly do you plan to convince the board? They're notoriously conservative about the Asian expansion." "Michael has a presentation next week. I've helped him prepare it." Once he's VP of operations, he can push through your proposal easily. And what does your husband think about you meeting me like this? Sophie laughed. Michael sees what I want him to see. He's so desperate for approval, it's almost too easy. I leaned against the wall, blood pounding in my ears. Was Sophie having an affair? Or was this some kind of business manipulation? There's still the matter of the unknown shareholder. The man, David said. No one seems to know who controls those shares since old man Westbrook died. Michael says his father left everything to some trust. The shares will come to him eventually. Until then, we work with what we have. Speaking of which, there was silence, then sounds that confirmed my worst suspicions. I hurried away, feeling sick. Back home, I called James immediately. He arrived within the hour, bringing along Sarah Miller, the former CFO of Westbrook, who had retired last year but still served as my proxy on the board. Sophie's involved with someone named David, I explained. They're plotting something involving an Asia expansion, and she mentioned Michael's upcoming presentation to the board. Sarah's expression darkened. That would be David Reynolds. Smooth. Operator. Runs a consulting firm specializing in Asian markets. He's been pushing the board to invest millions in a risky venture. We've been resistant. Until now, James added grimly. If Michael becomes VP of operations and advocates for it, they're using my son, I said, the realization burning like acid. There's more, I continued, explaining Sophie's comment about the unknown shareholder and Michael eventually inheriting. James and Sarah exchanged looks. Martha, James said gently, I think Sophie is planning for the long term. If she believes Michael will inherit controlling interest. She's positioning herself, Sarah finished, setting up influence and connections for when that happens. My hands trembled. And Michael? Where does he fit in her plans? Neither answered, but their silence spoke volumes. There's something else, I admitted. Last night I overheard a phone conversation. Sophie's been pressuring Michael to have me move to Sunset Valley Retirement Community. She says I'm becoming difficult to manage, and it would be better for everyone. James's bushy eyebrows shot up. That's a rather expensive facility. Yes, I said. And apparently Michael would need to sell my house to afford it. The house that was fully paid off. The house that, while modest, was worth considerable money in today's market. This is getting concerning, Martha, Sarah said. Sophie appears to be manipulating both Michael's career and your living situation. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Robert and I had planted together. I made a promise to my husband, I said quietly, but I don't think he would want this. What do you want to do? James asked. I turned back to them, decision made. I want to protect my son and the company we built. Not by revealing everything. Right away. That might just drive Michael further into Sophie's influence. A more subtle approach, then, Sarah suggested. I nodded. I'm going to attend the board meeting next week, not as Martha Westbrook, but as M.R. Wilson, the proxy shareholder. It's time I saw exactly what Sophie and this David are planning. And if Michael recognizes you? James asked. I smiled grimly. Sophie has made it very clear that no one expects to see Martha Westbrook in a boardroom. Sometimes invisibility has its advantages. As James and Sarah left, making arrangements for the meeting, I felt a calm determination settle over me. Sophie thought she was playing a clever game, using my son as a pawn in her ambitions. She had no idea she was playing against the woman who had built the board itself. The day of the board meeting arrived with a pounding rainstorm, fitting for the turmoil I felt inside. I stared at my reflection in the bedroom mirror, barely recognizing myself. Gone was the simple Martha in practical clothes. Sarah had taken me shopping for the occasion, insisting that M.R. Wilson, mysterious major shareholder, would dress this part. I wore a charcoal gray suit with subtle pinstripes, crisp white blouse, and low heels that still felt foreign on my feet. My usually unstyled gray hair had been cut into a sleek bob and colored a rich chestnut brown, close to my natural color before age had taken it. Sarah's stylist had shown me how to apply makeup that enhanced my features without being obvious. "Perfect," Sarah said, appearing behind me. "You look like exactly what you are, a powerful businesswoman who owns 51% of a successful tech company." I touched the delicate gold watch that had been Robert's gift on our 25th anniversary. Robert would hardly recognize me. Sarah squeezed my shoulder. "He'd be proud, Martha. You're protecting everything you built together." The Westbrook Technologies boardroom was on the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I entered behind Sarah, who had coached me thoroughly on how M.R. Wilson would behave. Confident, reserved, observant. Heads turned as we entered. I recognized most of the board members from the reports James provided, though I'd only met a few in person over the years. Michael sat near the middle of the table, looking nervous. At the far end sat Sophie, who technically had no position at the company, but had apparently been invited for this special presentation. Beside her was a handsome man in his early 40s, David Reynolds, I presumed. "Ah, Sarah," said Richard Foster, the board chairman. "And this must be M.R. Wilson," Sarah supplied smoothly. "Here to observe today's proceedings." Murmurs circulated the room. The mysterious shareholder had sent proxies to meetings for years but had never appeared in person. I nodded politely but said nothing, taking a seat near the head of the table. Michael was staring at me with a slight frown, as if trying to place my face. I kept my expression neutral, though my heart pounded. Would he recognize his own mother, beneath the tailored suit and new hairstyle? His gaze moved on. Sophie leaned over to whisper something to David, both looking suspiciously at me. I opened the leather portfolio Sarah had provided, acting absorbed in the meeting agenda. The meeting proceeded with routine business first. I spoke only when necessary, keeping my comments brief and direct as Sarah had advised. Michael kept glancing at me, that puzzled look returning. Sophie was less subtle, openly studying me with narrowed eyes. Finally, Richard announced, "Next item, presentation on the proposed Asian market expansion by Michael Westbrook." Michael stood, straightened his tie nervously, and moved to the front of the room. As he began his presentation, I could see Robert in him, the same earnest intelligence, the careful way he explained complex concepts. But I also saw something Robert never had, an undercurrent of desperation, a need to impress at all costs. His proposal involved opening offices in Singapore and Shanghai, with a significant investment in speculative software development tailored to Asian markets. The numbers he projected were ambitious, bordering on fantasy. "As you can see," Michael concluded, "our projected return on investment would be 27% within 18 months, with potential for exponential growth thereafter." I glanced around the table. Most board members looked skeptical. David Reynolds, however, was nodding enthusiastically. "Very impressive, Michael," David said. "If I may add, my consultancy has extensive connections in both markets. We could facilitate immediate entry points, significantly reducing typical startup costs." Sophie beamed at Michael with manufactured pride. I felt ill watching her performance. Richard looked unconvinced. "The investment required is substantial, and these projections seem conservative, actually," David interjected smoothly. "My team has compiled extensive market research." I'd heard enough. I cleared my throat softly, and the room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. "Mr. Westbrook," I said, addressing my own son, "formally, your enthusiasm is commendable. However, I see several flaws in your proposal." I proceeded to ask pointed questions about his market analysis, risk assessment, and contingency planning. With each question, Michael's confidence visibly deflated. Sophie's expression turned from confusion to anger. "Who exactly are you to question this proposal?" she finally interrupted. "Michael has worked extremely hard on this presentation." "Sophie," Michael muttered, embarrassed by her outburst. "No, Michael," she snapped. Some mysterious shareholder who never bothers to show up suddenly appears and starts undermining you? That's not right. I met her gaze steadily. Mrs. Westbrook, I'm simply doing due diligence as a major investor in this company. Your husband's proposal risks millions of dollars on projections that appear to have been influenced by outside interests. I glanced meaningfully at David. David shifted uncomfortably. Richard and other board members were watching the exchange with growing interest. I move that we table this proposal pending further review, I said calmly. And I suggest we investigate Mr. Reynolds' relationship with Westbrook Technologies more thoroughly before proceeding with any partnership. The vote was quick and decisive. Michael's proposal was tabled. As the meeting adjourned, Sophie stormed out, David following close behind. Michael lingered, looking defeated. I approached him, conflicted. Part of me wanted to comfort him as his mother. Instead, I spoke as M.R. Wilson. Mr. Westbrook, your basic concept has merit. The execution needs work. I'd be willing to discuss improvements if you're interested. He looked up, surprised. Thank you, Ms. Wilson. I'd appreciate that. As I turned to leave, he added, Have we met before? You seem familiar. My heart skipped. Perhaps in passing. I knew your father. His eyes widened slightly, but before he could respond, Sarah appeared at my elbow, easing me toward the door. In the elevator, I finally exhaled. That was harder than I expected. You did well, Sarah assured me. The board was impressed. And you've bought time to address the real problem. Sophie, I said. And this David person, they're using my son. What will you do now? Sarah asked as we reached the lobby. I stared at my unfamiliar reflection in the mirrored elevator doors. The decision I'd been wrestling with for days crystallized in that moment. It's time to tell Michael the truth, I said quietly. Not everything. At once, that might push him away. But enough so he understands what's really happening. Sarah nodded. When? I'll invite him to dinner tomorrow. Alone. As we stepped outside into the rain, I felt both terrified and resolute. 5 years of honoring Robert's wishes, of staying silent while Sophie gradually isolated my son from me. Tomorrow would change everything. What I didn't know then was that Sophie had already set a different plan in motion, one that would force my hand sooner than I expected. I barely slept that night, rehearsing what I would say to Michael when he came for dinner. By morning, dark clouds had gathered both outside my window and inside my mind. I was making coffee when my phone rang. James. Martha, we have a situation, he said without preamble. Sophie's made a move. She's convinced Michael to call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. My hand froze on the coffee pot. What? On what grounds? They're proposing a restructuring of the executive team. If it passes, several board members loyal to you would be removed. His voice tightened. And there's more. She's somehow gotten wind that M.R. Wilson is connected to you. How is that possible? I asked, my mind racing. I don't know, but Michael called Sarah this morning, asking direct questions about your involvement. He sounded agitated. I set the coffee pot down with a shaking hand. I was going to tell him everything tonight. You may not have that luxury, James cautioned. Martha, if Sophie has convinced Michael you've been deceiving him all these years. The doorbell rang, interrupting him. Someone's here. I'll call you back. Through the peephole, I saw Michael standing on my porch, his expression stormy. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Michael, I wasn't expecting you until... Were you ever going to tell me? He demanded, pushing past me into the hallway. Or was the plan to keep lying to me forever? I closed the door, my heart pounding. Michael, please, let me explain. Explain? What? That you're actually M.R. Wilson? That you've owned the company all this time? That my entire career has been? He raked his hands through his hair, a gesture so like his father's. What, Mother? A joke? Some kind of test? No, I said. firmly. Never that. Please, sit down. Let me tell you everything. Reluctantly, he followed me to the living room but remained standing, arms crossed. How did you find out? I asked gently. Sophie, he said. She hired a private investigator after the board meeting. She thought there was something strange about this Wilson person who appeared out of nowhere and tanked my proposal. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course she had. Is it true? Michael demanded. Do you control Westbrook Technologies? I looked my son in the eyes. Yes. Your father and I founded the company before you were born. When he died, I inherited his shares. I own 51% of Westbrook. Michael stared at me as if seeing a stranger. All these years, you've been living here in this modest house driving that old car while you were worth millions, I confirmed. Yes. Why? The word came out like an accusation. Why would you hide this? Why would you let me work there? Not knowing? Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? It was your father's wish, I said. He wanted you to succeed on your own merits, not because you were the owner's son. He believed it would make you stronger, more independent. And you? Michael's voice cracked slightly. What did you want? The question pierced my heart. I wanted to honor your father's dying wish. But I also wanted to protect you, Michael scoffed. Protect me? From what? Success? Wealth? Knowing my own heritage? From never knowing if you'd earned your position, I explained, willing him to understand. From the doubt that would have followed. You if everyone knew you were the boss's son. He was silent for a long moment, processing. And the board meeting yesterday? What was that about? I chose my words carefully. I had concerns about the proposal. The projections seemed unrealistic, and I was worried about the involvement of David Reynolds. His eyes narrowed. What about David? This was the delicate part. How much to reveal about Sophie without pushing Michael further away. I have reason to believe his involvement may not be in the best interests of the company. Sophie says he's brilliant. Michael's defensive tone told me everything about his state of mind. She says the board is too conservative, afraid of innovation. Michael, I said gently, have you looked into David's background? His track record with other companies? Uncertainty flickered across his face. Sophie did the research. I think you should do your own, I suggested, before tomorrow's board meeting. His jaw tightened. You know about that too. Yes, I admitted. And I need you to understand something important, Michael. The restructuring Sophie is proposing would remove the very people who helped your father build this company. People who have protected its integrity for decades. Sophie says they're blocking progress, he countered, but with less conviction. I moved to my desk and pulled out a folder, the one James had prepared months ago when we first noticed David Reynolds circling the company. This contains information about Reynolds' previous ventures. 3 companies that invested in his Asian expansion plans. All 3 suffered significant losses. One filed for bankruptcy. Michael hesitated, then took the folder. Why should I believe anything you say now? You've been lying to me for years. The accusations stung, but I understood his pain. I haven't been completely honest about my role at Westbrook, that's true, but I have never lied about loving you or wanting what's best for you. He looked away, blinking rapidly. Michael, I said, softly, think about how quickly Sophie found this information about me. Less than 24 hours after the meeting. She must have already been investigating. Already suspicious. She was protecting me, he insisted, but doubt had crept into his voice. Was she? I asked. Or was she protecting her own interests? He stood abruptly. I need time to think, to process all this. Of course, I said, rising. 2. But Michael, please, before tomorrow's meeting, look at that folder and ask yourself why Sophie is pushing so hard for this restructuring. At the door, he paused. All those board meetings over the years. You were there, weren't you? As M.R. Wilson's proxy, I nodded. I wanted to stay connected to what your father and I built, and to you. Something shifted in his expression. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a crack in his anger. The board meeting. Is at 9 tomorrow, he said. I suppose you'll be there. I will, I confirmed. As myself this time. No more proxies. After he left, I called James and Sarah, updating them on the confrontation. We spent hours strategizing, calling loyal board members, preparing for every possible scenario Sophie might unleash. By evening, I was exhausted but resolved. Tomorrow would decide everything, not just the future of Westbrook Technologies, but my relationship with my son. As I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. It contained a single photo, Michael and Sophie having dinner with David Reynolds, all three looking grim and determined. Beneath the photo was a message. They're planning something bigger than a restructuring. Be prepared. I stared at the screen, wondering who my mysterious ally was. Then I recognized the restaurant in the background, and the waitress partially visible at the edge of the frame. It was Diane, Robert's niece, who had waited tables at that restaurant for years. She had recognized Michael, Sophie, and clearly found their conversation concerning enough to warn me. I sent back a simple thank you and set my phone aside, a plan forming in my mind. If Sophie wanted to play hardball, she'd find I was more than capable of stepping up to the plate. Tomorrow, Martha Westbrook would finally take her rightful place at the head of the table. The Westbrook Technologies boardroom fell silent as I walked in. No disguise today, just Martha Westbrook in a simple but elegant navy suit, my silver hair neatly styled, Robert's watch on my wrist. Board members who had known me for years, but only as Michael's mother or as Sarah's mysterious client, stared in confusion. Sophie, seated beside Michael near the head of the table, looked like she'd been slapped. David Reynolds, on Michael's other side, leaned over to whisper something in his ear. What is she doing here? Sophie hissed loudly enough for everyone to hear. This is a closed board meeting. Richard Foster, the chairman, looked equally confused. Mrs. Westbrook, I'm afraid. It's quite all right, Richard, I said calmly, placing my leather portfolio on the table. I believe you'll find I have every right to be here. James Patterson entered behind me, carrying his briefcase. Mrs. Westbrook is here in her capacity as majority shareholder of Westbrook Technologies, he announced. She holds 51% of the company shares. A collective gasp rippled through the room. All eyes turned to Michael, who sat rigid, his expression unreadable. This is ridiculous, Sophie sputtered. Michael's father owned the company. The shares are in a trust until Michael turns 40, I finished for her. Yes, a small portion are. But the controlling interest passed to me upon Robert's death. Richard looked bewildered. But Miss Miller has been voting those shares for years as my proxy, I confirmed, and as M.R. Wilson when necessary. Another shockwave visibly passed through the room. David Reynolds's smooth composure finally cracked. Mrs. Westbrook has documentation confirming all of this, James added, pulling papers from his briefcase, which I'll happily provide to each board member. But perhaps we should address the purpose of today's emergency meeting first. I took a seat directly across from Michael, our eyes meeting briefly before he looked away. The hurt was still there, but something else too. Uncertainty. Yes, let's proceed, Richard agreed, gathering himself. Michael, you called this meeting to propose restructuring the executive team? Michael cleared his throat. Actually, in light of recent information, I'd like to propose a different agenda. Sophie whipped her head around to stare at him. Michael, we discussed this. Stick to the plan. A tense silence followed. Michael looked down at the folder in front of him, the one I'd given him the day before, containing all the evidence about David Reynolds's failed ventures. I spent last night doing additional research, Michael said slowly, about our company's history, about David Reynolds' business record, and about the Asian expansion proposal. He looked up, his gaze moving from Sophie to David to me. I found some troubling inconsistencies. Michael, Sophie warned, her voice tight. He ignored her. Mr. Reynolds has been involved with 3 companies that attempted similar expansions into Asian markets. All 3 suffered significant losses. David's smile turned cold. Markets involve risk, Michael. Your father understood that. My father, Michael repeated, emphasis on the word, built this company with careful growth strategies. He never gambled with his employees' livelihoods. I felt a surge of pride hearing Michael defend Robert's principles. Furthermore, Michael continued, I discovered that the projections in my proposal were based on manipulated data. He turned to Sophie. Data you helped prepare. Sophie's face flushed. You're being ridiculous. I was helping you. Were you? Michael challenged. Or were you helping David secure a multi-million-dollar consulting contract? David stood abruptly. I don't have to sit here and listen to these accusations. Actually, you do, I interjected, because the board should also know about your previous relationship with international tech partners, the company you recommended as our Asian manufacturing partner. I nodded to James, who distributed more documents. A company where you were previously a silent partner and still receive consulting fees, the board members murmured as they reviewed the evidence. This is a witch hunt, David snapped. Michael stood slowly. No, it's due diligence. Something I should have done before bringing this proposal forward. He faced the board. I withdraw my proposal for Asian expansion and recommend we sever all ties with Reynolds Consulting. Michael! Sophie grabbed his arm. You're ruining everything. He pulled away from her. No, Sophie, I'm stopping us from making a terrible mistake. He turned to face her fully. Just like I'm stopping us from making a terrible mistake about my mother. Sophie's expression turned venomous. Your pathetic mother has been lying to you for years. She's been controlling your career, manipulating everything from the shadows. My mother, Michael said quietly, has been honoring my father's wishes while protecting the company they built together. He looked at me then, his eyes softening. Something I'm only beginning to understand. Richard cleared his throat. In light of these revelations, I believe we should adjourn to consider next steps. As the board members filed out, Sophie remained seated, her face a mask of fury. You've ruined everything, she hissed at me. We had it all planned, the promotion, the house, everything. You had it planned, Michael corrected her, using me as your stepping stone. Don't be naive, Michael, she snapped. Everyone uses, everyone. Your precious mother used you too, keeping you in the dark while she controlled everything. There's a difference, he replied. She did it out of love. You did it out of greed. Sophie grabbed her purse and stood. This isn't over, she threatened, glaring at both of us before storming out, David trailing behind her. Finally, Michael and I were alone in the boardroom. I'm still angry with you, he said after a long silence. You should have told me the truth. Years ago? I know, I admitted. Keeping your father's promise became a habit, then a shield. I was afraid if I told you, I'd lose you. Instead, you almost lost me to Sophie's manipulations. He shook his head. When did you know? About her and David? I suspected at the company party, I said. Then confirmed it when I overheard them at the office. He nodded slowly. Last night, after I left your house, I called some former colleagues who had worked with David. Everything you said was true. His voice caught. And then I started wondering what else you were right about. Sophie? I asked gently. I checked. Her phone while she was in the shower, he admitted. The text between her and David. They've been planning this for months. using me as their ticket into the company. He looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Was I that blind, Mom? The word mom, so simple, so powerful, broke something open inside me. We see what we want to see in the people we love, I said softly. I've made my own mistakes. Michael came around the table and took the seat beside me. What happens now? With the company? With us? I reached for his hand. That's up to you. Your father wanted you to make your own way, and you have. You're a good businessman, Michael, with or without the Westbrook name behind you. And Sophie? I squeezed his hand. Also your decision. But speaking as both your mother and the majority shareholder of this company, I'd recommend some serious reconsideration of that relationship. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Already ahead of you. I packed a bag this morning. 2 months later, I sat in the same boardroom, watching with pride as Michael presented a new proposal, a carefully researched plan for expanding our educational software division. Sophie was gone from his life, though the divorce proceedings were just beginning. David Reynolds had disappeared, moving on to other potential marks. Michael had moved into the guest house on my property temporarily, he said, though we both knew he was healing from more than just a failed marriage. He was reconnecting with his roots, with the legacy his father and I had built. And so, Michael concluded his presentation, I believe this expansion stays true to Westbrook's core values, while positioning us for sustainable growth. Thank you, Michael, I said from my place at the head of the table, a position I had finally, publicly claimed. The board will vote now. The proposal passed unanimously. As the meeting adjourned, Richard approached me. Martha, I've been meaning to tell you, Robert would be proud of how you've handled everything. I smiled, touching the watch on my wrist. I think he would be prouder of Michael for finding his own way, just as Robert wanted. Later that evening, Michael and I sat on the back porch of my home, our home, watching the sunset, much as Robert and I had done for so many years. Mom, he said thoughtfully, I've been thinking about the company name. Oh? I took a sip of my tea. Everyone associates Westbrook with Dad, but you were always there too. Maybe it's time for a small change. Nothing dramatic, just acknowledging the full story. What did you have in mind? I asked. Westbrook and Wilson Technologies, he suggested, honoring both legacies. I felt tears prick my eyes. Your father would like that. And the mysterious M.R. Wilson? Michael asked with a small smile. Will she make any more appearances? I laughed softly. I don't think so. Martha Westbrook is finally ready to step into the light. As the last rays of sun gilded the garden Robert and I had planted, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Sophie had called me a leech, never knowing that I was actually the foundation of everything she coveted. Now the truth was out, and with it came not the revenge I might have sought, but something far more valuable: redemption, reconnection, and the chance to finally honor both Robert's legacy and my own. Sometimes, I reflected, the greatest power comes not from hiding in the shadows, but from finally stepping forward to claim your rightful place in the sun.